15. As far as I could tell, this would make him about 13 years older than Benjamin, possibly. A lot of guesswork here, but anyway, they're pretty young. Joseph, though, was 17 now. And it said in verse 1, chapter 37, verse 1, Jacob was living, and notice he's referred to as Jacob. Just here in a chapter or two, his name is used, and it's referred to him as Israel. Of course, God changed his name. But anyway, Jacob was dwelling in the land wherein he was a stranger. What is that land, do you think? Dwelling in the land, and he was, well, we read over in Hebrews that by faith Abraham sojourned in the land of promise, Canaan. But that's also true of his son Isaac and his son, Isaac's son Jacob. They all were sojourners. Mainly, I think they're called that because they didn't have any property of any size. So, as far as we know, the only land that Abraham ever purchased was a cave and a small area around that cave to bury his beloved Sarah. So now it says Jacob, Abraham's grandson, was in the same land of Canaan. He was a stranger there. He didn't own any property. He made his living on an open range, I guess, like it used to be way back hundreds of years ago in our area. Just open range, no fences put up. Well, that's probably what was going on here. And they moved their stock, their sheep, whenever it had been grazed down to a certain level. Probably they went on and moved the shepherd, whoever it was, in this case probably Aaron and his brothers who were just a bit younger than he. He was the oldest child. And then you find the statement made in verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. Period. What an odd way to begin a verse. I think probably I would have put this statement, these are the generations of Jacob. I think I would have put that at the end of verse 1 instead of beginning of verse 2. But I've seen there's a number of places in the Bible where, I think the old joke has been, you had different, I think in the time of Hugo, that the Bible was put into chapters. In verses, they said it was Sir Robert Stephanus, or much later, 200 or 300 years later, he divided it up. And some maintained that as he was riding his horse and he got ready to put a verse period, that the horse kind of stumbled and he missed it. Well, that's just a way of saying probably it would have been better if this part of the verse had been included back in verse 1. These are the generations of Jacob, it says. And what we're doing now at this point is beginning the actual story of Joseph. Starting here in verse 2 after the first sentence. Okay, now Joseph's older brothers, and you probably got it memorized, but if you haven't, think about it. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. We're going to hear about these four. We've already heard a lot about Levi and Simeon, and episode there in Shechem where they just about wiped out the male population, the young male population, because of the way that the Shechemites treated their sister. And as a result, the issues, the feelings were not good between the Shechemites and these sons of Jacob. Okay, so these older brothers, Reuben being the oldest, they were mature young men at this time because Joseph was 17. So they'd been around longer, probably due to their age and their experience that they were beginning to branch out on their own. Their dad was giving them more and more responsibility. And so their duties kept them away from the family. That is, Rachel was dead by this time, but Leah and her boys, the kids' mother, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, were all children of Leah. And Leah had two more sons that were younger, and they were Issachar and Zebulun. So it looks like that Joseph, and I try to put myself in their shoes and also look at today's people and how we gravitate toward those who are usually about our age. That's not unusual at all. So that's probably what we had here. Leah's other two boys, younger, were Issachar and Zebulun. And Joseph stayed behind. Look at who his friends were. The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Dan and Naphtali, along with Gad and Asher. So he, being younger, naturally gravitated toward the younger half-brothers of his. Probably all five of these, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Joseph, probably all of them were in the process of learning about shepherding. Dad had given them a lot of responsibilities, Jacob we're talking about, and not only shepherding, but animal husbandry, all the little obligations that go along with this kind of agricultural type business. Benjamin, of course, was still very young. Probably today we would say preschool. They didn't have school systems then like we do today, but he was probably around 4 years old. And so he naturally was not with the rest of the boys. They were much older, some of them in their early 20s. So he was still home. Leah was still taking care of Benjamin and living with the dad, Jacob, at home. Rachel has already died, been buried. Jacob had reason to be, certainly, very disappointed in his older children. Now, I'm going to recount this very quickly. If you have questions, raise your hand. But first of all, he was disappointed in Reuben. Do you remember why? Well, Reuben, of course, had an affair with Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid. And she was older than him, evidently quite a bit. But he had an affair with her, and that caused him to be able to have the line of, the Christ child. I always keep that in my background thinking, who's going to be in that line? Of all things, one woman by the name of Tamar is, and you say, why would she be in that line. Because people are people, and people make mistakes. Reuben made a mistake. I like to believe that Reuben repented of it because he acted more admirably later when his brothers thought, we'll get into this in a moment, but his brothers decided that they were going to sell him as a slave to passers-by to take on down into Egypt. It was Reuben who stood up and said, no, let's not do that. Well, bless his heart, Reuben was right. The brothers were wrong. But we've got things going on here that you would think, I know I did, why did they act this way? I mean, after all, they're in the line of the genealogy of Christ some 1,700 years later. So why were they acting? Because they're human beings, and human beings make mistakes. You remember the statement made over in the New Testament? It goes like this. Due to a background, I think, of idolatry. But looking back, the writer makes a statement that all these people were certainly God's children, but they made a lot of mistakes, and we're covering some of those right now. Reuben, for example, with Bilhah, he was wrong as he could be. But not only that, the New Testament writer says, at the times of this ignorance, God winked at, or God overlooked. But not anymore. Now, since Christ has come, the old law has passed away. Now things are different. Why? Now he commands all men everywhere to repent. So these were times of ignorance, acting as they should not, but the same thing is pretty typical when you look at our age and see some of the same shenanigans going on having to do with sexuality, etc. Okay, Jacob was disappointed in not only Reuben, but he was disappointed in Levi and Simeon. You remember why? Well, because when they were at Shechem, they decided they're not going to treat our sister Dinah that way. And so they hatched a plot whereby they had all the people, the Shechemites, the men to agree to be circumcised. And they said, then when they're circumcised, then we'll all be one family. Well, the people fell for it. And then the third day after the circumcision took place, of course, was probably the worst day of soreness. They're not capable of fighting and so on. They're out of commission. And those two boys, Reuben and Simeon, went in with swords, evidently from house to house, killing all the men that had allowed themselves to be circumcised. Where would you have been in all of this? I don't think Jacob would have put up with it, but I don't think Jacob knew about it. Simeon and Levi are the ones that seem to be the leaders of that plot. So now we've got Reuben and his sin. Now we've got these three boys and what they pulled, these two boys. So Reuben and Simeon and Levi were all on God's blacklist, or Jacob's blacklist. Now Joseph begins to bring him some disturbing reports about 4 other brothers. And we're talking now about children of the 2 handmaids. he comes to Dad and he gives some reports. Well, let's take a look at the text. Genesis 37, verse 2. The lad, Joseph, was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, the two handmaids, and his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father an evil report. Now again, I probably wouldn't have done this. I would like to think that I would have done it. I don't know why he did it. Maybe he had a problem with pride. Maybe he thought he was better than the other half-brothers, 11, other 10 boys. But whatever the reason was, he gave this report to his dad. And verse 3, notice the word Jacob of verse 1 is now changed to Israel. Same person, same man, name change. You never heard of the 12 tribes of Jacob, but you heard a lot about the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, that's where this change took place. Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. That too was a mistake. Whenever one child seems to be a favorite, and I can understand that. Sometimes some children, if you've got 3 or 4 kids, and maybe a couple of them are always getting into trouble, and you're always on their case, and you're administering discipline, do you tend to favor the one who's very cooperative and easy to get along with? I'm not trying to say everything was hunky-dory, but I think I can understand why that Jacob felt the way that he did toward Joseph. The problem was, how's that going to make the other boys feel? We get to that very quickly. Look at verse 2. He loved Joseph more than the others because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Did he give a coat to all the other boys? Evidently not. And I want you to keep in mind the next few verses, how many times this statement, that coat of many colors, comes up. Because that gets to be a real sore spot with these brothers. Especially when you watch their actions and what they begin to do. Okay, now where are they? Well, they're back up near Shechem. They left Hebron. Dad was down at Hebron. Dad and Leah and the younger Benjamin. These older boys had taken the sheep and had gone about 50 miles north up to Hebron. And there they were. And it says that when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of them, that caused them, the children, to hate Joseph because, well, he was the favorite. And evidently Dad showed it. The giving of this coat was a real part of their resentment. Maybe that's a good term. And it says they could not speak peaceably with him. What's that saying? I jotted myself a note. They never had a kind word for Joseph. Every time they thought about Joseph, they were angry. They resented the fact that he was a favorite child. That favoritism was shown by the giving of this coat. And that just began to simmer and boil inside of them and made them extremely angry. And they took that out primarily on Joseph. Well, it didn't help when Joseph began to be a talebearer. And he tells Jacob about 3 or 4 of the other boys and what they had been doing. Probably if I'd been there, I would have said, don't do that. You're going to create some problems. But anyway, he became a talebearer, a snitcher. I don't know the terminology that you use, but he was saying things that it'd been a lot better if he just kept his mouth shut. Just be blunt about it. It'd be better if Joseph hadn't done that. Okay, now, he did, and he said these things, and it did not endear his brothers to him. In fact, it made them very angry. Verse 5. Joseph dreamed a dream. Again, I don't know. I think this probably was given, this dream was probably given to him by God, and it was done for his own encouragement, to encourage him, probably, I guess. But instead of bringing about that, this fellow, Joseph, decides to tell people about it. He goes right to the brothers and said, hey, listen, I had a dream last night. Look at verse 6. He said to them, listen to me. I had a dream. Behold, we were binding corn sheaves, binding them together in the fields. And as I was, now this is a dream. This is not actually happening. It's a dream. But he said, in my dream, I was binding my sheaves, and I noticed that my sheaves they stood straight up. And then your sheaves bowed down to my sheaves. Now, what's that going to cause? Well, they were already angry. And that was just pouring fuel onto the fire. And his brother said to him in verse 8, oh, you mean you're going to reign over us? Are you going to have dominion over us, your brothers? And they hated him because of his dreams and because of his words. He not only dreamed it, he could have kept his mouth shut, but he didn't. He dreamed it and he put it into words and told them. Obviously, as you look back on this, you're going to think that wasn't a very wise thing to do. Those boys are already extremely angry. Well, he wasn't through dreaming. Look at verse 9. Joseph dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brothers. And he said, behold, I had an additional dream last night I want to tell you about. In my dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now, the 11 stars, well, none of this is hard to figure out. I mean, the 11 stars represent his 11 brothers. And who would be represented by the sun and the moon? Mom and Dad. Now, Mom's already dead. Rachel, Joseph's mom, has already died. But that's not the point. The point is that he was dreaming the dream, and in this dream that he had, Mom and Dad were there. So her already having died doesn't cause a problem here. It's simply to be understood this way. he is to be preeminent over the entire family. That's what's going on. They resented it, and that was just on top of that coat that Dad had given him. So all of this is building up now. This time, verse 10, even his father, Jacob, or Israel, rebuked him. And he said to him, son, what is this dream that you've dreamed? You mean your mother and I and your brothers are going to bow down ourselves to the earth before you? Well, they knew the meaning of the dream. So his brothers envied him. But look at that last statement. But his father observed him. Oh, I imagine he did. I can think of a lot of things that were going on in his mind when Jacob told his daddy about this dream. But you knew what the brothers were going to do. That it just made matters worse. But it said his father observed the saying. If you will, go over to 1,700 years later now. Look at Luke chapter 2 and verse 51. When I read this passage in Genesis, I thought about this passage in Luke, so I went ahead and got my concordance and I found the verse reference. Luke 2 and 51. Now Jesus was about 12 years of age when they were at the temple in Jerusalem, mom and dad and a lot of family members. Verse 51 says he went down with them. But it said he came to Nazareth and was subject unto mom and dad. But, both of these sentences start with but. That's a word of contrast. But what did his mother do? Well, he made some statements like, don't you realize that I must be about my father's business? What does that mean? Mary thought. And she pondered these sayings in her heart. Look how similar that is to what went on here. In verse 11, Genesis 37:11. His father observed the saying. He thought about it. Probably he was thinking, Joseph was thinking to himself, well, this is a prophecy about me, that one day I'm going to have superiority over all of my family. But the dad, Jacob, probably wondered in his own heart, is Joseph actually correct in what he's dreaming? I'm thinking that's probably what went on in the mind of Jacob, because he pondered that saying too. Okay, now, I don't know how many days have passed by, verse 12, but his brothers went to feed their father's flock up in Shechem. Now this is about 50 miles north. Hebron was south of Shechem. Now remember, Shechem is where all of that problem took place, caused by Levi and his brother Simeon. Having all those men agree to being circumcised, and when they were physically unable, they went in and just wiped them out. Well, I think probably that they were concerned. I know Jacob was. Jacob said, look, boys, you have made me stink in the eyes of Shechem people. And they're going to come and they're going to overtake us. Well, God didn't allow that to happen, but they did get up and moved, and they moved south about 50 miles. Okay, now these boys had gone back to Shechem. Again, we let our minds wander. Surely Shechem people hadn't already forgotten about what they had pulled on them. But it looks like that they were bold, and they took their flocks and went right back up to Shechem after a number of months, or perhaps a couple, 3 years had gone by. And they didn't have any fear of retribution, I'm guessing, because they went right back up, took their flocks with them to find pasture back up there, 50 miles north. Okay, now, I doubt that Jacob, because this is opinion, but I doubt that Jacob would have agreed to take the flocks and go back up to Shechem. I know how he felt about it. He told the boys, "You made me stink in their eyes." But they went up, probably made a decision by themselves, not even letting Dad know that they made that decision. Maybe, who knows, maybe they had somebody else tell them. Maybe they told them, "Hey, you go and you tell Dad that we've gone to Shechem, taking the flocks up there." I can't see Dad being willing to go along with that, but that's what the sons did. They ended up at Shechem. All 10 of the boys left, only Joseph and Benjamin now at home. Apparently they left to go to Shechem with the flocks. And Dad becomes concerned. He hadn't heard from them. My 10 oldest children, they're gone. Been gone quite a while now. Hadn't heard a word from them. And so he has an idea. He's going to send Joseph back up there to Shechem to find out how the boys are doing, and then come back and tell him. That today we would probably just fire off an email and find out in a matter of seconds. But this took a number of days, about a week perhaps, to get up there. So again, you wonder how much, what's going on in Jacob's mind in all of this, but I don't think that Joseph, and maybe even Jacob himself, the daddy, I don't think they suspected just how much those older brothers hated Joseph. Why? Because if he was aware of how much they resented Joseph, he wouldn't have sent Joseph back up there to find out how things were going. So I don't think that Jacob was aware of it. But anyway, he sends him. And his job, locate your brothers, come back and give me the report on how things are going with his brothers up there. Okay, he heads out. Verse 14. He sent him out of the vale of Hebron, north to Shechem, which is about 50 miles north. He gets up to Shechem. When he gets up there, and then he can't find them. His brothers and all of their flock are not there. And I don't know, verse 15, you can read a lot into that, but it says a certain man there in Shechem saw him, Joseph, and he saw Joseph wandering in the field, just going about here and there. Probably it became pretty obvious to this guy that he's looking for something. So he says to him, "What are you looking for, young man?" And he tells him, "Well, I'm seeking my brothers. I pray thee, I want to find out where they and the flocks are." And the man, sure enough, he had heard. Because the Bible says, "I heard them say." So he overheard a statement that they were going to be leaving Shechem and going on further north to Dothan. Dothan. And so that's where Joseph was heading. Why'd they go up there? Again, your guess is as good as mine. My guess is that they heard there was a lot of pasture land and good water. So they probably, because of that, they headed up there. Now Dothan was about 20 miles further north. So this distance from Hebron is about 70 miles away from Jacob now. So it would take at least one more day for Joseph to get there. Like a day's journey, 20 to 25 miles. He can make that in about a day. But not with flock. You can't take flock, a bunch of sheep, and go that fast. They're simply not capable of doing that. So it took his brothers a good while to go that distance, but he handled it pretty quickly. The word Dothan means two sisters. Cisterns. Cisterns. A well-like structure to preserve water. The only problem was at least one of the wells, maybe both of them, but the one well at least was dry at that time. And I'm guessing that one of the boys noticed that the thing's dry. We can't get any help here with getting water for our sheep. Okay, now he goes on and he goes on toward where the boys are located, 20 miles north at Dothan. And they saw him, verse 18, they saw Joseph even before he came near. How do you suppose they knew it was Joseph when it was a long ways off? Remember the coat? That coat, most of at least I've learned all my life, a coat of many colors, that's possibly true, but that Hebrew word there, all that word really means is a long-sleeved coat that's going down to the ankles. But it probably was very bright, variegated, ornamented colors. It really stood out. So here comes a fellow wearing that very same coat. That's how they knew from a distance that it was Joseph. Verse 19, and behold, one of them said, "Behold, the dreamer comes. The dreamer cometh." Well, that little phrase just is teeming with resentment. The dreamer comes. I thought of 1 Kings 18, verse 17. Remember when Ahab, much later, many years later, Ahab meets Elijah, and Elijah, he tells Elijah, or he asks Elijah, "Are you the one that's troubling Israel?" And Elijah says, "I'm not the one troubling Israel. You are, King Ahab, because you are practicing idolatry. You brought all the trouble on Israel. Behold, the dreamer, Joseph, comes." This guy says, Ahab says, Israel is the troubler. Anyway, the dreamer is coming. Here's what we need to do. Let us kill him, cast him into a pit, and then we will say some evil beast has killed him and eaten him. And then we'll see what becomes of his dream. Now these boys hated Joseph, and you can tell it by what they've got in mind. Bless his heart, Reuben speaks up. The oldest boy, he's got some importance or some influence, and he decides, I better say something. So Reuben says, no, let's not kill him. And notice the reason why. He delivered him out of their hands. He was taking charge, disagreeing with their plan to slay their brother. And Reuben said, instead of that, do not shed blood, but rather cast him into this pit that's in the wilderness. But don't lay a hand on him. Now what's he thinking? Well, he's thinking, as soon as a day or two passes, I'm going to slip away from my brothers, come back down here, and I'm going to get Joseph out of the pit. How do I know that? Well, let's read verse 22. Reuben said, don't shed blood, cast him into this pit, don't lay a hand on him. And he said that in order that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father Jacob. So the Bible tells us what his motive is. He's going to rescue his younger brother Joseph. I'm guessing that this original plan back in verse 20 about killing him was mainly hatched up by his younger brothers. Maybe even Simeon and Levi would have been willing to go along with it. But anyway, Reuben, he wanted to help his brother Joseph escape. So give him credit. I mean, yeah, Reuben made a bad mistake in this affair he had with Bilhah. But give him credit. He stood up against his own brothers. I think that means that he probably repented of the fact that he had sinned. And now he's trying to straighten up and fly right. And there's the bell. We'll see you next week. Thanks.